Okay, we've got a working application now, and before we finish this section, we're going to make a few improvements to how we're dealing with our data in the store. There's a couple of things we want to take a look at before we end this section, and one of the things I want to take a look at is our use of arrays to store our activities. I want to take a look at an alternative approach. There's nothing wrong with using an array here, by the way, and we could manage everything using that array. But let's take a look at something else. And I just want to refer to the JavaScript map object. And the map object holds key and value pairs and remembers the original insertion order of the keys. Any value, both objects and primitive values, may be used as either a key or a value. So we could use, for example, we could use our activity ID as the key, and then we could use the activity object as the value. And that is exactly what we're going to do. Now, one of the advantages over using this map object, instead of using an array, is the methods that we have available on a map object. Now, we can always get an array from this map object. We can get an array of the activities outside of this without a problem. But what we can also do is we've got methods to clear. We can delete a specific key. So whereas we're using the array filter method to delete an activity, at the moment we have a method specifically to delete an activity by its key, which is more efficient code. We can also get an activity by its key, see if a key exists in our JavaScript map objects, and we can also set as well. And we've got methods to iterate over these as well. So we can get the values, we can get the entries, we can do a for each, just like we use an array for. And I find this a bit more powerful to use than using an array to store the objects that we're going to be interacting with a lot in our application. I just find this a more efficient way of doing things. So what we'll do is we'll head back to VS Code and we'll start making some adjustments to this. So I'm just going to close the other things down and just focus on the activity store. And what we'll do, instead of using activities, what we'll do is create something called an activity registry. Can be called anything, of course, but what this is going to be is a new map object, and we can give this some types, and the key value is the first type, and that's going to be a string which represents the activity ID. And the second type will be the activity object itself. So then what do we do? Well, let's go take a look. And in our load activities method, what we're currently doing is we're pushing our activities into that array that we created as a class property. But instead of doing this, what we could do is remove that line and say this .activityregistry.set, and then we can set the activity ID as the key and then the activity itself as the value. And then we can update our different methods inside here. So where we're selecting an activity, then instead of using this activities find, what we can use is say this activity registry.get, and then we just pass in the ID. And this is then going to return the activity that matches that particular activity ID. The cancel selected activity does not change. The open form does not change. And where we're creating an activity, then what we'll do is we'll update the code inside the running action. So instead of the activities array, we'll use the activity registry and we'll say set. And once again, we'll specify the activity.id and the activity. And the other methods don't need to change inside there. For the update activity, then once again, instead of list code here, what we can do is say list activity registry.set, and again we can pass in the activity ID and the activity as the value. And then for our delete method, once again we can simplify list code, and we can say this.activity registry.delete, and then we just pass in the ID. And that takes care of all of these methods. And what we also want to do is, well, we need to return our activities because we're no longer storing them in this activities array anymore. And of course, we've currently broken our application because we've removed this property from the store. But what we would like to do as well is also sort our activities by date. And what we can use for this is a computed property. And we haven't looked at these yet, but what we can do is we can specify that we want to return the activities by date. So what we'll do is we'll say get and then activities by date. And then inside this method, what we're going to do is return the activities sorted by date. So first of all, we want to get an array. So what we're going to do is say return array from, and then we can say list.activity registry .values, which is going to give us all of the activities. And then we can chain on a sort method. And the sort method is going to take two parameters, the activity A and activity B, both the activities we want to compare against each other. So we'll pass in A, B as the parameters here. And then inside here, what we'll do, we'll return the date.pass, and then we'll say a.date minus date.pass, and then we'll say b.date. And let's just move down the code to fit it all on one line, or all on one screen, I should say. So now we've got a computed property that's going to work out the activities in data order based on this code. And then all we need to do is set the activities by date instead of the activities that we're passing down. So let's go to our app component first of all. And we're not actually passing down any activities. So we can go straight to our activity list where we are getting our activities. And instead of activities, we're just going to say activities by date. And then we're going to loop over activities by date inside here, and all our errors should go away. But what we should find now is that our app, if we just refresh the page, is our activities are going to be in date order. So we've got our test MobX create there, which is the first on this list. And let's just change the date to after January the 30th to move it down the list. So we'll click on view, we'll click on edit, and let's just change the date to February the 2nd and click on submit. And now we can see that it moves down the list and our activities are now sorted in date order. And there's just one more thing I want to do before we finish this lesson, and that's deal with this flickering, which we don't need to see. And what we can do to adjust that is quite a simple change really. If we set our loading initial to true, inside here, then we can remove the set loading initial true from this. And that small change alone should resolve that flickering. And if we just go back and refresh the page again, now we can see that we don't attempt to display the component before the loading indicator is set to be true. So a tiny little change resolves that flickering. So this brings us to the end of this particular section. So what we're going to do is we're going to, as per usual, is commit our changes into source control. Just double check, make sure there's nothing there that you're surprised about, and we'll click on stage the changes and we'll say end of section 7. And we'll then go ahead and push these changes on up to GitHub. And we'll wrap this up with a summary.